So that's what's up, man.
Uh, I wanted to ask you some questions about the case specifically, and I know earlier you mentioned some of the names of the victims, and correct me if I'm wrong here. You have Xana, um, Kaylee, Ethan, and Maddie, and there were other people in that house that night as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, two other students. Yeah.
Um,
What?
by chance, the survivors that night, were you able to speak to them or their families?
No, they're under gag order as well, and the survivors, understandably, had sort of like shut the drapes, so to speak. Like they were hiding, running, left and right from press immediately. One of them, Dylan, lives. Her family lives about 1 mile from my house. Um, I went over there and left some notes saying, "Hey, I'd like to talk," but obviously, anybody familiar with this case knows that they would not have gotten back to me, but you got to try anyway. But I did talk to Dylan's dad. I went and met with him at his house, and we sat in his dining room table, and we had a decent conversation. And Bethany, she lived in Reno area. I don't know where. I don't know. I think they might have moved. Like, I mean, they're just because of all this, like it's they were being hunted by paparazzi and reporters and whatever. I mean, when I say paparazzi, I mean legitimate paparazzi. Like, um, a photo of Dylan's sister ended up in the Daily Sun or Daily Mail or whatever it's called, and they said Dylan goes to the coffee shop. She's wearing running shorts and whatever. Like they had a picture of her like she was some kind of celebrity, but it wasn't even Dylan. It was her sister because they're too stupid to understand that it wasn't even her. They just found a picture. Like they took a picture outside of her house, assumed it was her. They posted it, and it was her sister. Like a minor, 17 years old, and they're posting her on the Daily Sun or whatever it's called, the Daily Mail. And so, man, they were running. They were running. They did not want to be in the spotlight. Their four friends had just been brutally murdered. Um, I mean, in the same house they were, and they were just, that will come out in the court case what they were up to at this time. Um, Dylan is notable because she actually appears to have seen the perpetrator. She says that she saw a man walking out of the house. He was wearing a mask. He was wearing all black. He walked right past her. She said she was like frozen. And, your brain doesn't go to like, oh, my friends must have just been murdered. It was like, 4 a.m. And she went back to bed. She went back to her room, even though this strange man had left the house. And people say, well, what? Well, why would she do that? Why didn't she call the police? Why didn't she go look around? We don't know the answers to that exactly. Psychologists have pretty good reasons for why she might not have. They say, well, the brain reacts funny in trauma. You can't expect this young woman to know what to do in the middle of the night, maybe possibly after a night of drinking, definitely after being asleep, 4 in the morning, woken up in a like what's going on? Who knows what's going on at any, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you see some guy, maybe she thought she was dreaming, maybe the brain shut down to protect her, or fear a trauma response. Maybe, we don't know. Or something that we'll learn once the court case happens, because that the guy they caught, Brian Koberger, is going to trial next year. So maybe we'll learn something about what happened with Dylan after that. But right now we can only speculate as to why she didn't call the police or whatever until 8 hours later, around noon, um, when she realized something terrible had happened. And Bethany was also in the house, but apparently has apparently slept through whatever had happened, or was just, there's rumor now that they were texting each other like, "Hey, did you hear something?" or whatever. But we don't know factually what that's whether that's real or not. So um, yeah, man. But those two survived and have not been public at all. They have attorneys that are telling them, You cannot say a word to anybody about anything, no matter what, even a hello to a reporter. It's these, whatever it is, it's talking to any of these people is off limits, and they've abided by that, and nobody really knows where they are. I mean, you could find them, but the only reason to do so would be to harass them. You can't really interview them because they won't do interviews. So
Do you think, going back to that night and what the uh, what the one survivor saw, Dylan, do you believe the perpetrator? Is there a chance that the perpetrator saw the Dylan, or were they just oblivious and they didn't even know she was there, and the perpetrator just walks out of the house and goes on his way?
yeah, so I mean, for your listeners, because we didn't really give, they caught some guy, and based on catching him, after catching him, they put out the public information requests for the public for the probable cause affidavit for his arrest came out, and so that document was hit the internet, and basically on the strength of that public information request, on the strength of that probable cause affidavit, here's what we know, or here's what the police say happened. Here's what the police say happened. In the middle of the night, 4 a.m., this guy, who may or may not have known these people, who may or may not have been angry at these people, who may or may not be just a stranger killer, or who may or may not have been slighted by one of them, or may or may not have had a target in one of them, goes into the house at 4 a.m., goes up to the third floor, kills the Maddie and Kaylee, two best friends, University of Idaho students, but friends since junior high, and living in North Idaho together. He goes upstairs, kills both of them with a fixed blade hunting knife. Goes downstairs and kills Ethan and Xana, boyfriend and girlfriend, with the same knife. Exits on that main floor, through a sliding patio door, presumably where he came in from. As he's exiting, he walks past Dylan's door. She's in the doorway because she had heard some stuff, and she sees him, and he walks right past her. And there's no reason to believe, based on the structure of that house, that the two of them didn't connect, like eye contact or whatever. So presumably she saw him leaving. I mean, based on the diagrams of that house and whatever, he saw her too, probably, um, because it was, we're talking a matter of, like, can you look across your bedroom and see who's standing there? Like that. That's the distance we're talking about. He was in the hallway and she was in a bedroom door, but we're not talking about a mansion. We're talking about a couple thousand square foot place, and it's a regular kind of house in terms of space, like size. And then on that, beneath that floor as well, was Bethany. So Dylan was asleep on the floor where Dylan was in her room on the floor where Xana and Ethan were killed. Same floor. I mean, we're talking, you know, you could flick a penny off your finger and hit the side, the other side of the room, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a family style home, kind of, even though it was shaped weird. And then in the basement floor, um, Bethany was in her bedroom. So um, anyway, this guy leaves, and yeah, it's safe to say that uh, uh, Dylan and he made some sort of eye contact or whatever, and both understood. Now you can say, well, why didn't she, like? There was this guy, like, wasn't he bloody? Didn't he have a knife in his hand or whatever? I mean, we don't know the answer to that. We can definitely say uh, whatever Dylan's trauma response was, or whatever she was thinking, we'll know. We'll know once the trial happens. We know everything is speculation right now. We also can say it's speculation as to what he was thinking. He just stabbed four people. And you think, well, why did he leave two alive? We don't know the answer to that, but maybe his own trauma response, maybe his own fight or flight, maybe his own whatever made him just go zooming past her and not take another beat because he thought maybe he thought the longer I stay in this house, the more chance I have of getting caught. Maybe he thought, maybe his adrenaline was so high, it's like his brain wasn't even functioning anymore. Maybe the emotional, psychological maybe it's the first time he's ever killed anybody, and so he just stabbed four people to death. Maybe we don't know what that's like. We don't know what he was thinking. We don't know why he left them alive. If he was the person who did this, and it looks like he was because they found some evidence that led to his arrest. One is they apparently accidentally, although we don't know that until the court case, um, or until it goes to trial. But the knife sheath was left behind in the upstairs bedroom after killing Maddie and Kaylee. Somehow the sheath either dropped or he put it there on purpose or it was torn off in a scuffle or whatever. And there was touch DNA evidence under the snap of that sheath that eventually matched to him. It took a while because all kinds of things transpired in the process, but his cheek swab, when they actually caught him and whatever, his cheek swab matches that DNA on that knife sheath. So one can say it puts the sheath as having been in his possession at some point. It doesn't put him at the scene of the crime because anybody could throw a knife sheath somewhere, right? But it definitely means that he had somehow at some point been in contact with that sheath. And then they have cell phone data that seems to place him in the area of that house on a dozen occasions prior. And the prosecution will say that he was stalking them, trying to figure out or trying to do recon on that house to figure out how to get in and out or whether or not he should do the crimes or not. Or he was just, he'll say, defense will say he was just driving in that area all the time because the cell phone doesn't put him inside the house. It just attaches him to the tower that serves that house. And then what else? They have neighborhood security cam footage of a Hyundai Elantra sedan that he of the type that he drove, going in and out of that area on multiple occasions, and three or four times that night, and then and he drives that car, and so there's lots of things, but they don't have an eyewitness, right? So I mean, except for Dylan, we'll see. Dylan said that she noticed his bushy eyebrows and his physicality, his stature, or his muscular, said he was athletically built. He had a mask on, but she described bushy eyebrows. Well, the guy they caught, Brian Kober, he also fits that description. So they have an eyewitness, at least as far as we know, that can ID a person in a mask. But whether that'll hold up or not, it's questionable. Well, the defense will say he was wearing a mask. The guy you saw was wearing a mask. Let's take 19 people with bushy eyebrows and put a mask on them. It'll be hard. And it's 4 a.m. and you just got out of bed. They're going to question that. But all that is to say that it looks like they got their guy. And it's just a matter of figuring out really what happened after the trial. We'll know a lot more. But hey, man, who's to say why, whether or not they connected like that, where they looked at each other and had rational thoughts, or whether or not they were both in trauma mode. I mean, I do not know what it's like to murder people, but it certainly seems like the adrenaline and all kinds of stuff, endorphins and whatever, wreak havoc on your normal rational thoughts. And especially if you're inexperienced. This was not a guy who just came out of 6 years of Marine training or whatever. He's just a student. Oh, and also he was a criminology and criminal justice student at nearby university. For your listeners who don't know that, so a lot of people say he was very well versed in how to commit crimes. Even though he had maybe never murdered anybody. He also had posted a Reddit survey at some point related to his master's degree in criminology. And the Reddit survey was like asking for people who had committed violent crimes to tell him what it was like, to address things like adrenaline at the time of the crimes. How did you make your intro? How did you make your exit? Did you plan ahead? What did you plan for? All kinds of stuff. And so he's definitely got this sort of resume of somebody who, if you wanted to say did these crimes, looks good for it, but but he was also a PhD student in criminology and criminal justice, and that's what those people do. They research criminology and criminal justice. Like, so you can't say that that makes somebody a murderer. Otherwise, you'd say every cop in the world has the potential to be a murderer because they studied criminology, and it's ridiculous. So, um, it's a really interesting case, and that's kind of partially why it blew up, in the media and stuff.